If it's in the culture, then it's in the show. Yeah, hey. If it's in the culture, then it's in the show. This is the Matt Black Podcast, hosted by Clarity.
Wanting necessarily who we are in our ethnicity to be what rules us, but the King of Kings, but not losing that authenticity of who we are.
Yeah.
Because that's extremely important.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying? And I feel like if we're not careful with that, then what we teach is not unity,
Right.
but it's uniformity.
For sure.
And I truly believe if we get lost in uniformity, then
we get further away from the gospel.
Absolutely.
And what all brings us together.
Absolutely.
To the Matt Black Podcast, where we teach the culture from a reformed lens. We're talking sports, movies, and music. If it's in the culture,
it's in the show.
I am your host. I'm kind of taking on a little something today. It's your boy, Jusmack, and none other than the great Kenny Klarity here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So today, this is what we're jumping into. We're just gonna kind of hit this on the head. We want to talk about the Great Migration. All right, and for you history buffs out there, I'm not necessarily talking about the Great Migration from the freed African American people post-slavery and all of that stuff when they moved to the North for better jobs and better way of living and to get away from, murder and pillage.
Oh, yeah, just throw that in there.
Just throw that in there.
Yeah.
But more specifically, I'm talking about the Great Migration to the African American church and from the African American church. I think that there's been a great migration of people leaving because there has been a narrative that the African American church context has been second tier. It's inferior. The worship style, the teaching, the preaching, the pastoral, figureheads that have made black preaching and just the African American church push forward through generations and decades has been looked at as, not top shelf. And so today I want to kind of venture into why were we leaving, and now why, if you would be honest, if 2020 we seeing a migration of people leaving churches, specifically maybe some multi-ethnic churches, some evangelical white churches, and coming back to the motherland, if you will. So yeah, that's what I want to jump into today. So let's kind of get. And I know you coming out the cage swinging. I already know.
Listen, man. It's you know what? It's not even that for me.
Yeah.
I think that I have a unique perspective only because I was around black church early on, like with my grandmother and things of that nature.
For sure.
Wasn't saved and didn't grow up in a household where Christianity was, central. Right. So I don't have like an indoctrination with the church like some of my counterparts may. Right. So then you go from that to having an introduction, and that introduction only look a certain way. Be removed from it. Right. Then when I actually came to faith, being thrust into the white church.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So now for me it's like the first original church that I've known as a believer has been the white church. Right. But living a very black reality. Of course. With black family.
Yeah, you wake up black.
I wake up black. You know what I'm saying? I'm dark skinned. Just in case y'all didn't notice.
Yeah.
And so with all that being the case, it's just been interesting. So for me, I told you guys in an episode where I talked about me being in a white church and turning that space around. And what I've noticed was that if we're going to talk about the Great Migration, I had seen that or tried to bring a restoration between the two bodies.
Yeah, for sure.
And I realized when social justice became a thing,
it started to tear away.
You started to see people go, oh, wait, y'all don't love us.
Right.
Like we thought y'all loved us.
Right.
And people are afraid to say that.
Yeah.
But really, we feel unloved from the white church.
Yeah, that's why we are. I don't want to say that's why we are the way we are, but that is mainly how we operate. When you don't feel that affection, when you don't feel that love, you now move in a very protected state and mindset. Absolutely. And I think it's unfortunate. I want to get us to a place where both churches, although we may speak to our specific context, we can still love each other, and we can still say, hey man, how is your church doing? Are you know, hey, how can we be of assistance to you? So yeah, I mean,
now here's the thing. I don't necessarily know where racial reconciliation moves or fits into this type of discussion.
Yeah, because
we do want there not to be a divide between our white brothers and sisters and our black brothers and sisters. However, the reality is different.
Yeah.
And what we realize, our views on the everyday practical needs are different.
Water,
and so I think that's why we've seen a move from the white church or the multicultural church, wherever black people were leaving to now a great migration back. Yeah. So one thing I want to read for you, and I definitely want your thoughts, is somebody who I don't think I haven't met many brothers who have a good sense of theology that you have, and also have an affinity and a love for the black church. Right. This is Dr.
We are out there, though. I want you to know that.
This is Dr. James White.
Okay.
Right. We know James White for being a great apologist.
James.
And you know, his theology is solid.
Yeah,
and
he's solid.
He's definitely been a pillar in the faith, especially within Reformed circles.
Yeah.
He said this. I want you to tell me what you think. Which is more likely to be central to the cause for the fact that black women are 3.5 times more likely to kill their unborn children? Is it 1, fundamentally rebellious sexual ethics, fatherlessness, and sexual license, or 2, slavery from 160 years ago?
I just don't even know, like, when I read that and when I hear you say it to me again, I just don't even know where to start.
I mean, if you need it again, okay.
It's just like how, as much as I respect him for what he said and what he's done in regards to theology and the church, like, how do you frame yourself to say something like that? Like, you know what I'm saying? Even before I deal with it, like, how do you get this number, and then from that number you pull these two things, as though that's just, hey, these are the only options. When honestly, it's a bit of both, right? If I mean, like, we're not gonna sit here and say that slavery is still not playing itself out today.
Well, hold on. I want you to hold that thought.
Yeah.
I love this man who I'm about to bring up, and I won't bring his name out.
Yeah.
But I served under a pastor who was white, who literally said things such as, I understand that, there could be some residual effects, but we don't know that for certain. It can't be proven. And all that we can deal with is the here and now. You guys have been removed from slavery for quite some time.
Man.
And you're not necessarily fighting slavery or injustice now.
Come on, man.
Now, he was gracious. He was understanding.
For sure.
But that's just,
I
think that viewpoint or that ideal is much more prevalent than you would even imagine. Just putting that out there before you continue to your next point.
I really want to unpack that a little bit more, but I'm gonna let that stay there.
Yeah, we can.
But for us to not think that there are still things from slavery that are plaguing us today, although it may not look like
what? That's the question you're gonna get. Like what?
I mean, the fact that we are learning and having to teach our children how to live, right? To not only like make it to be successful, but to make sure that they make it from one day to the next. That is a direct stemming from slavery, right?
So you're talking about systemic injustice?
Yeah, I'm talking about systemic injustice. I'm talking about, just literally going to school and living life. Like, how I'm teaching my son how to go to school and what to do and how to speak up for themselves and how to show themselves, that you are intelligent, that you know what you're doing, is a direct stemming from, okay, we need to make sure we all get here together, we leave together, this, that, and the third, right? And so for me, I'm like, for you to put slavery on there as though it's kind of like this one-off.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's faulty. That's faulty to me. And that black people are more sexual or more into getting it in than any other race. And that fathers are just... Let's kind of disclaim this whole concept that there aren't fathers in the home. I think that's a narrative that's been pushed way too long.
It's a myth.
It's a myth. And let's be honest, even if the father is not in the home directly because that father and that mother are no longer married or couldn't work out the relationship, a lot of these fathers are still invested in their children's lives.
Absolutely.
I'm a product of it, right?
1,000%.
I'm from a blended family, but my mom and my dad were not together. But I knew how to work. I learned how to be a man from seeing my father, who didn't live in my house every day.
And I had a father in the household.
So, I mean, you talking to two individuals who had the best of both worlds. You understand what I'm saying? And contrary to probably believe, most black people got two parents in the household. They may eat each other up and not like each other a lot, but they in the house.
Facts. And even if we don't say most, a lot more than you saying, well, fatherlessness is just such a.
That's not even a thing.
Now we can talk about. We don't necessarily get into the politics of it as to why that may exist for government funding and things of that nature. I think some of that is true, and we could parse through that. Yeah. But this idea that fathers are just absentee in the black community,
it's just not a thing.
Especially now, in my opinion. And I think numbers support that as well.
For sure, yeah.
The biggest thing for me is that people act like systemic injustice is a myth because they're saying, well, we can't tangibly see it or touch it, and so therefore it doesn't exist.
Right. It's not. You can. You just choose not to.
Right. But my entire existence is still having to be parsed through a viewpoint or life, even like you talk about Fortune 500 companies or when I apply for jobs and things of that nature, that is seen through a white lens. And so that alone, if we're talking about anything else, is still something that is a disadvantage that people who are not of color do not have to experience. So I think that's important to know. Also, I get it. Black crime is a problem. Abortion is a problem, things of that nature. But it just seems as though we never talk about white on white crime, that's a thing. Which really is a thing, and not only that, the numbers support that it's more of a thing than in the black community.
And my thing is this, because someone would hear our argument and say, "Well, your point." I don't even want you to not point out what may be wrong in my context. What I want is an even broad stroke across everything.
Right.
That's it. Like, is there black on black crime? Yes. But if we go to some suburb areas in Midwest America or we go to certain places, we're noticing the same things. It's just that it looks different for all of us. And difference does not mean it's not there. It does not mean. And I just think that statement, like, why is that even a statement? Like, you're saying that fatherlessness and the sexual activity of black people is more likely of that rather than what slavery is, rather than I'm saying slavery contributed to all of it. And so they're kind of one and the same. And at the end of the day, how do we help? How do we help? Like, if we know, which is that whole great migration. So if that's being preached to in that church where those black women are, and let's say there's a black woman in that church that the relationship didn't work out, she has this child, how are we aiding her? And I can honestly say that the great migration is happening backwards because they may not necessarily have the answers to an experience that they don't experience. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so we get to this inferiority because I think, for me, my context, you talked about yours, I was reared, like, all I know is black church. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can remember. I know that I can smell it. I can feel it. I can hear it getting out of the car, and I can hear the music bumping through the walls. You know, and so for me, once again, that broad stroke of making one general statement wasn't necessary for me. When I grew up, I remember being taught biblical things from the pulpit. I remember at a church that I went to, in order to go from 5th grade or go to 6th grade to the youth ministry at an African American church, you had to recite Romans Road of teaching the gospel. And literally, like, you would get to 6th grade and they were like, all right, this is your step to go into youth ministry. They would have these paper mache stones and they would make out a road, and every student would walk in the hallway and you would have to walk and recite it and then explain how you would explain that to an unbeliever.
Come on, man. People are not talking about that.
And see, that was my experience of growing up in a black church. So when I would hear these things in high school, and especially when I got to college, about, people, I don't go to church no more. Y'all don't be talking about nothing. It's just be yelling and screaming. I'm going to go over here, or I really listen to this person. Or when I started getting into people like David Platt and G.I. Packer and all these people who are great, it wasn't something like I was like, oh my gosh, where's all this robust knowledge? But I was like, I kind of already knew about this.
So a couple of things for me, bro. Because I get fired up when I think about.
You know
this.
what I'm saying? Like me too, brother.
The reason why this is important to bring up: 60 years ago.
Yeah.
60 years ago, we were still being hosed down. And
my mother just turned 53.
Like, literally, your grandparents can tell you of the racism they experienced within the country, and yet there seems to be this idea that that's no longer the case. Two, because of those residual effects, moving into 2020, where we are now, I think the Great Migration is happening for a couple of different reasons. One, it started because they felt the culture perpetuated. Yeah. The Christian culture, black churches talking about nothing. Right. It's all about tithes and offerings and big suits and money and money cometh to me and Creflo Dollar and what's your boy Leroy Thompson and all them dudes.
And I had never even
that's all that it is, right?
Yeah.
Then black people were like, well, if I want a solid word and really know Jesus for real, I got to get out of here. And then all of these authors we're reading and we're introduced to, like you said, J.I., David Platt, John Piper, John MacArthur. Yeah. What do they all have in common? Bing! They're white. You know what I'm saying? So we like, well,
I guess white is right.
I guess white is right. And not only that, if I want something solid, if I want to learn about the sovereignty of God, if I want to learn about sin, places. Repentance, faith, if I want to learn about what it means to grow in sanctification, then I must do those things from people who look like them, who kind of have the same background in education. But then here's what we came to find. Yeah. We went to these churches, we served, we loved. We
learned all of these things.
We learned all of these things, which are great for the faith.
Hit them on the head, bro.
And then when life hit, I just wish I had one witness. When life hit, we realized,
they got none.
They don't have. See, they can equip us mentally, but they don't have a heart for what we have a heart for. They can't practically walk through. You can't tell me about how to.
And they're unwilling. Right? That's the biggest thing.
That's the biggest thing.
Because I don't expect you to walk this journey. God has sovereignly, watch this, created us to have two different journeys. And because we have two different journeys, you should be there for me to lean on you and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I need to come to you to learn information just like I would go to you. You understand what I'm saying? And so that misconception and then that wealth of building up my head knowledge, I don't have anything to relate to people. Right? And so when I tell you that I grew up in a African American church context where, my stepfather, who was a pastor and a minister, I remember getting up in the morning and listening to people like Tony Evans. Like, that was somebody I remember listening to at like 9 and 10.
That's what I'm talking about.
You know what I'm saying? People like E.K. Bailey. People like, not only E.K. Bailey, I mean, people even from my hometown that I just remember that could preach the wall down. And no, they weren't standing there, talking. Yeah, it was a lot of yelling, and they hooped at the end, and it was a celebration. But it was quality preaching, bro.
That's like what it's about.
Sound, like Evie Hill. Like these are people that are not going to be remembered because and it's not to negate the books that they were able to write. E.K. Bailey, he wasn't worried about writing books because he was like, listen, I'm going to do a conference so I can help young black people.
Absolutely, bro.
You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
as
bro.
much work as Tony Evans has done and as much sermons he's preached.
First African American author to write his own commentary.
Come on, bro. You don't think it should have been more? You don't think that? But the problem is Tony Evans was like, I got to get this message out to these people. And I got to make sure they know. I want to write this stuff down, but at the moment time, they're going to get it better.
Give me a moment here, bro. If I can have a moment. What we do not need is a whitewashed theology.
Yes. Agreed.
We don't need it.
Agreed.
I appreciate my brothers.
Yes.
John Piper, John MacArthur, all the people I went to for my theology, and that's great. But when it came to my lifestyle, they weren't unable to help me.
They had
practically walk through urban ministry,
right,
and deal with the urban apologetics the way that we have to talk to cats, 5%ers and the Hebrew Israelites, and like they're not in those spaces. So what we don't need is a whitewashed theology. What we need is a balanced theology, a theology that deals with not only the loftiness of God and who He is, but a theology that also meets my need on the street. Man. Can you give me both? And that's what we need.
And one of the things that I remember, I was talking to my stepdad, and I was talking to some other African American ministers that I really appreciate, local guys, nobody on the major, and I said, what this is a time where I was discovering the John MacArthurs, you know what I'm saying, and all, because I grew up on people like Adrian Rogers and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I was like, man, I'm reading this book. I'm kind of reading this stuff, and I remember you teaching me about this. It was like, oh, yeah, man, that's good, man. That's good stuff. Read it. That's good. And what they told me, they was like, you need to have a biblical-based theology. You don't want to lean too far this way. You don't want to lean too far this way.
That's good.
You want to have something that's biblically based, and you want to also make sure that you look at the audience that you're a part of, and you speak to that. You know, and they just were honest. They said, there's nothing wrong with what those guys are preaching. They're solid. But what I would do is not necessarily going to work in their context, and what they would do is not going to work in my context. But we respect all of it. And so what I've heard friends that are leaving those spaces, they're like, man, I need something that's going to be able to speak to me and my children about what they're dealing with in a real way. You know what I'm saying? And so I just think that the part of us not making it second tier, the part of us is understanding, like you said, that we need something that's based out of the Bible that can speak to us in a real way and not just top heavy.
Truly, bro. Because when I think about so I think to answer the question, that's the migration originally started because I think black believers, African American believers begin to feel like, man, we need substance, right. And we're being force fed through multiple mediums that wasn't happening within the black church. Mm-hmm. Then I think the migration was happening the other way. Is happening the other way now because they realize, oh wait, we got what we needed on one end, but lacked the whole other side to what we actually absolutely need now.
For sure.
So here's the thing for me, bro, is I would listen to things like, you know, don't waste your life and, you know, don't follow the American dream.
Right.
But in the black community, man, like getting a house, ownership is huge. You know, the 2.5 kids and a dog and owning a home and having in entrepreneurship, like yeah, you guys don't need to chase that because you may grow up in a privileged household. But for us, that's everything.
Man, that's everything. Getting a loan to start a business.
And so what I realized was like, man, I'm listening to this Don't Waste Your Life. I'm listening to this and I'm saying to myself, man, I shouldn't chase the American dream.
Right.
Or I shouldn't chase, you know, ownership, things of that nature. But I'm like, in my community, that's premium. Mm-hmm. Maybe this isn't speaking to me in a way that is effectual to what I'm walking through.
Sure.
And so I guess as we close, bro, what can we learn from the Great Migration? One. And then two, what are some things you would like to see moving forward?
I think what we can learn is that no one church has a monopoly on anything of God, right? Like, there are some things that our white brothers and sisters that can help us with, and there are some things that our black brothers and sisters can help us with, and we need to see that in unifying the church. We may not sit together every Sunday, we may not worship together every Sunday, but we can see that and we can pull from that to help in those spaces. And then I think going forward, I just think that we need to take an introspective look at what we need and ultimately what that church is offering, and don't broad stroke any church. Don't broad stroke any black church. Don't broad stroke any white church. Go and see what the Lord is doing or what He may not be doing in that specific church, and then grow and go to where you need to be, man. So
that's good, bro. Yeah. That's good, man. I wish we had more time to cover this, man. But we'll be back.
Yeah.
Like, comment, subscribe. This is Matt Black Podcast. If it's in the culture,
it's in the show.